UCLA's got a couple of big games coming up, but should we be worried about UCLA running into a mental wall?
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel because Super Bowl 59 is here. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And where we get started today is, where's UCLA? They're a team that slotted in the tournament with Mick Cronin dealing with the early January woes, turning into 4 straight wins after the Aday Mara emergence. Yet Cronin, speaking at his media availability, was talking about how he's afraid his team's going to reach an emotional wall. I'm not sure what that stretch was in early January, where they lost 4 in a row. But if that's not the wall, then what could it be? Well, maybe he's going to allude to the fact that, hey, there's a couple of things going against UCLA right now. You've got, one, a very different schedule. Cronin touched on this. Pac-12, you play Thursday, Saturday, Wednesday, Sunday on occasion, but that was the schedule. It seems like that's how it should be. The Big Ten, even though they're playing the same amount of games, it feels like there's a game every day of the week UCLA is playing. I'm not joking. You sit there like, UCLA playing Monday, Tuesday. In Big Ten conference play, UCLA is going to play every single day of the week, I think, except Wednesday. And I could be wrong with that. In conference play, they're playing basically every day of the week from January until late March. Every day of the week. So focusing on the schedules, mixing that in with the academics that we forget's a part of this. Now that the quarter has started for UCLA, some schools that have been in semesters just got back to school. The Bruins have been already in school, taking those classes, leaning into this new part of the season where they're dealing with the travel, the thousands of miles they still have to travel with tough games, both winning back-to-back games without their leading scorer in Tyler Bilodeau. Oh, by the way, top 15, top 16, Oregon coming to town. Then you got a top 10 Michigan State team. Could be a top 5 by the time they get to Westwood. And oh, by the way, you play a scrappy Penn State team before heading on the road for a couple of those games. So Cronin is worrying about the wall. And that's something we do have to worry about, right? You mix in conference realignment for UCLA, and one of those things that we've talked about football-wise, basketball-wise, the travel, how is that going to affect the teams that aren't football? The softballs of the world, the baseballs of the world, men's and women's basketball, all the sports that are going to have to travel significantly more that are moving to the Big Ten. Now that UCLA, they're in a competitive part of the season, conference play, they're not sitting on the West Coast, when UCLA had some easier opponents, a lot of games at home and a lot of games closer to home. The games they played away from home in the early part of the season, UCLA lost to Nevada, to a tournament team right now in New Mexico. They went across the country to New York, losing to a North Carolina team that currently isn't going to be in the tournament. The latest bracketology had North Carolina in the tournament, but then they lost to Pitt. So North Carolina keeps falling further and further down the seed line to basically out of the field, first 4 out, potentially. Now I believe UCLA's got it, but Cronin, he's going to have his work cut out for him. And he was wondering and worrying how he will be able to deal with that, right? How can he mix this up? Well, the breath of fresh air right now is Aday Mara, who's come in and been amazing. Cronin has come out and said, hey, Mara is a guy that has showcased this offensive potential in practice all the time. The guys know what I've seen, and I've been talking about this for years. That's what Cronin's kind of alluding to. Now, what we haven't seen is this defensive prowess where he had 5 blocks in a game that featured 5 blocks between UCLA and SC, all going to Mara. The Bruins getting their best big man finally involved. Maybe Eric Dailey Jr. is fully healed from the facial injury that forced him to wear a mask for so long. They've got their best scorer, arguably best player, out right now with an ankle injury. Who knows how long he'll be taken to be fully recovered from that. This could be the grind, the schedule where you've got the travel that they've already done. You have the weird schedule. All right, they're playing on a Tuesday. When have we ever gotten down on a Tuesday in UCLA during conference play? Hardly, all right? Especially lately, it used to be, all right, you play this day, and unless you're on like a first four or something, you're not getting down on a Tuesday in the West Coast for Pac-12 basketball. That's not what it was. But now you're playing Sunday, you play a Friday or a Thursday, you play now on a Tuesday. You get an extra couple of days baked in for UCLA to rest, recover, and hopefully Bilodeau, if he's not ready for Oregon, will be ready to go against Michigan State. That can significantly help UCLA's seeding and ranking to move them up into the NCAA tournament's upper echelon of teams. If not, okay, they're in the tournament, but then the more they travel, which is coming up, Indiana. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, and the deeper you go in the tournament, potentially a 4th time if UCLA has to go to state of Indiana, or if they get thrown a first-round game in Ohio. All those are going to add up. And if UCLA, even with the best care, even with the most attention, all the money being poured in right now to help these athletes get better and better, that is something to look out for. The other thing Cronin was talked about with this media availability was, can he play Dailey, Bilodeau, and Mara together? And that just hasn't been exactly something I think Cronin has wanted to do or been able to do. Mara hasn't been ready. So UCLA's leaned a lot on Eric Dailey Jr. in some aspects. Bilodeau has been generally a source of consistency when he's on the floor, scoring, rebounding, but he's been going against big men. He's not a 5. He is not a 5. We want to see Bilodeau as a 4, and I'm not sure if we'll see. Cronin didn't seem too confident in Dailey, Mara, and Bilodeau playing a lot of minutes together. Now, he had teased post-game with all the emotions running after the UCLA SC game that we might see a Kyle-Mara combination and how you can mix all those minutes. Well, Dailey, what Cronin was saying after the USC game, he's not meant to play 35 minutes. That's not his role. So we will see Dailey maybe moving to a 28-minute per game role. Maybe Dailey, like I teased in the preseason, with this potential ideal roster, maybe Dailey comes off the bench, and maybe it's one of those that he comes off the bench immediately. He plays his 28 minutes, and you let Mara and Bilodeau go big and score early, and then you bring Dailey to be more of a versatile defender and score and keep his energy second. I am still trying to figure out what Cronin's going to do when everybody's been healthy, because Mara started the season off the foot injury, then Dailey got hit in the face, then Bilodeau rolled his ankle. We haven't seen all 3 of those guys when they've contributed at the same time for the most part. Now, we did see Wisconsin. That was a win for UCLA. Bilodeau, Dailey, and Mara. But Mara was almost thrown in there out of necessity and just dominated. And that's how UCLA beat a pretty scrappy Wisconsin team that couldn't miss from 3 at home. The thing that's going to impact UCLA moving forward is how can they utilize these players in the best roles. For the moment, they're learning how to win without Bilodeau, which is good. But how can they maximize the 3 of those guys if they're on the court together, or if Cronin, based on a matchup per matchup basis, flips it around game by game? Because this team is supposed to be deep. This team is supposed to have the versatility of going big, going small, going hybrid, playing up tempo with the full court press, having some guys that can hit threes, some guys that are better defenders, guys that can score down low. Cronin is supposed to be able to do that, and they haven't showcased the flexibility, the versatility to be able to, all right, I can throw in this guy if the situation goes wrong. I can execute when I need to go big. UCLA hasn't done that consistently. We'll find that out, though, when UCLA plays Oregon, and we'll talk about some keys and tips for what is another big chance for UCLA to secure a quad 1 win and sweep the Oregon Ducks, which can help their climbing up the Big Ten ladder. Next on Locked On UCLA. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. You can predict the first touchdown, who's going to win the MVP of the game, and maybe you're like, hey, is it heads or tails on the coin toss? You can do that too. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action, live betting all game long, and you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds so you can feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Live betting features can keep you involved regardless of what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate, so you place that $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, icing on the cake, or whatever goodies you're going to eat during the game. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, so here we go. UCLA, Oregon. We've seen this story before. This was pre-Mara. This was with Bilodeau. How did the Bruins beat the Ducks before? Well, this was a key game. Oregon was creeping in just outside the top 10 at the time. It was early December. It was after UCLA had a lot of cupcake games in the non-conference. They lost to New Mexico, which has turned into not so bad of a loss, and I didn't think it was at the time, but the way they played was horrible. Beat Washington, but Washington's in the cellar of the Big Ten. Oregon was that game that gave us hope. A week later, the Bruins then beat Arizona on our neutral site in the state of Arizona. So that brought a lot of hype towards the middle end part of December, where we thought, okay, the Bruins can compete. And Oregon's hovered around top 15 territory. Arizona is just basically a seed or a ranking below Oregon in the bracketology reports from Joe Lunardi, considering they keep winning and beating good teams in the Big 12. So those are some of the good wins UCLA's had, and they can add another by beating Dana Altman's Ducks. What is different from before? Well, UCLA now has Mata, a 7-3 player who can contend with Oregon's leading scorer, Nate Biddle. Nate Biddle is a guy who can average 12 to 13 points per game, get a couple of boards, and against UCLA the first time, Biddle went for 22 and 10, was pretty solid from the floor, went 2 of 3 from 3, and shot well better than 50% from the floor. Couple of blocks, 3 steals, 4 assisted, everything in almost 34 minutes of action for Oregon. Now, Aday Mara isn't a three-point shooter, nor is he as strong as Biddle is, but Biddle hasn't been as dominant. In the last game, Oregon's 7-footer against Minnesota went scoreless and had 4 points or 4 rebounds in 22 minutes. So that dominant force has not exactly withered away, but he was a non-factor against the Gophers, non-factor against the Golden Gophers of Minnesota. The story has been, I believe, that the sophomore guard Jackson Shelstad for the Ducks, who has been shooting in conference play better than 53% from downtown, 53% from the floor, and he's averaging almost 17 points per game. So the guy UCLA has to take a look at is Shelstad, because he is playing much, much better than he was in the non-conference. And it's not like he was playing bad. Oregon had a lot of wins in Big Ten play. They have Keyshawn Bartholomew. They've got TJ Bamba, some names we've heard before, and players who have made big impacts in games for Oregon's wins that have kept them around the top 15, despite being only 5-4 or whatever they are right now in Big Ten play. So Shelstad is going to be a key matchup for the guard, while UCLA might match up better or differently than they did a couple of months ago, a month and a half ago, with Mata versus Biddle. It's Shelstad, who against UCLA only scored 11 points in 36 minutes, but hit a clutch go-ahead 3 late, shot 3 of 4 from downtown, and only had 8 shots. I think that's going to change for Oregon. Shelstad in the last game that he played, I'm going to pull up the numbers right now so I can read them off, make sure I get this right. Jackson Shelstad, the sophomore guard, who was an all-freshman selection in the Pac-12, now that's sticking in my head. This is what Oregon did against Minnesota. Shelstad was 5 of 7, 2 of 3 from downtown, 15 points in 29 minutes. So the epitome of efficiency. Even TJ Bamba was shooting it well. It's because Minnesota took out Biddle. And you're wondering, okay, we don't know if Bilodeau is going to play for UCLA. Is that going to be a cause of concern for the Bruins, well, one, UCLA had limited impact from Mara. Mara had a buckets, 0 rebounds, and was in a -5 on the floor when he played his 6.5 minutes against Oregon the first time. Bilodeau, when he was on the floor against Oregon, let me tell you this, in 35 minutes, Tyler Bilodeau. Now, you can't always rely on the plus-minus, but I think this is very telling for that UCLA-Oregon game that was decided by a couple of points. Bilodeau in 35 minutes was not shooting the ball well. 3 of 11. He had 4 rebounds. Actually, he had 4 rebounds. Was -2. He was -2 on the court in a game UCLA at one point led by 10 against Oregon early in the first half. So Bilodeau had a negative rating. Who was really good? Eric Dailey Jr. And Eric Dailey Jr. had 19 points and 8 shots and was taken out late because Cronin didn't trust his defense. Kobe Johnson hit 3 of 5 threes. We've seen that to be the case in some games. He was 3 of 3 against USC, 7 points, fouled out. But he's hit some big threes, and him hitting 3 threes in a game is not a stretch. He's done that against Gonzaga. He's done that against good teams. Dylan Andrews had the biggest bank shot of his life to this point, calling game and bank against Oregon in a bank shot. Now, if you're wondering, UCLA got lucky to beat Oregon. They escaped Eugene with the win. That was partially true. You can go, I was reading this little write-up about Oregon in the Addicted to Quack website about the Oregon Ducks, addicted to quack like a duck. And they're talking about, okay, the first loss to UCLA was a downright prayer because UCLA had hit a bank shot. But if you look at the numbers and you remember how that game was played, UCLA won 73-71 in Eugene, by the way, their first loss of the season. They had started 9-0. It was a game that involved double technicals. UCLA and Oregon, 10 lead changes, 6 times the game was tied. So you think, okay, UCLA trailed at the half. They got lucky to win. UCLA had the biggest lead in the game, 10 points at one point. Oregon's biggest lead was 3. UCLA had the longest scoring run of the game, an 8-0 run, and led this game for almost 30 minutes. So remember, UCLA had a big lead, blew it, and Oregon went on a late run, crept in and stole the lead at the half. UCLA built the lead back up in the second half, all while getting somewhat negative play from Bilodeau, 0 impact from Mata, and it was Eric Dailey Jr. that made clutch shots. Sebastian Mack took a lot of shots to get 10 points, and Stefanovic was really good. So it was the depth of UCLA that helped the Bruins win this game, and we've seen this before. UCLA shoots threes, they don't turn it over, and they're generally going to win those games. When it's not just stat padding, they hit 12 threes, better than 50%. They didn't lose the game because of free throws because they only took 7. And then they kept their turnover number under 10. They had 9 turnovers. It was a lot of iso ball, a lot of made shots against the Ducks. I like to see them pass the ball around. But if Bilodeau doesn't play, game time decision, or is all right, UCLA won with him doing that before. Mata has a newfound confidence. Even William Kyle in this game had a couple of points and a few rebounds. UCLA has the formula for success, except Oregon's now leaning more on Shellstad than they were Biddle versus UCLA the first time. So it'll be key for Dylan Andrews, who just left the last game with cramping, Sky Clark, who struggled in the first half against USC with foul trouble, to stay on the court so Cronin doesn't have to lean on his true freshman Trent Perry to play a lot of minutes against the Oregon backcourt. This might be a game we see a lot more Lazar Stefanovic playing 10 to 15 minutes like he did against Oregon the first time, 20 minutes. This is a game UCLA can win. Now, history dictates UCLA doesn't always sweep Oregon. Oregon is very capable of coming into Pauley and winning. They just haven't played like it with the recent stretch. One more thing to add, Oregon is similar to North Carolina, where they let teams get out on them early in the game. They go up 10 or they get down 10. Remember North Carolina, if we were talking with Isaac Shade, the Locked On Tar Heels host, North Carolina gives up big leads early and come back late. That's exactly what happened. Here's what happened in the UCLA-Oregon game. UCLA got up big early, back and forth. UCLA came out of the gate in the second half, took a lead, and Oregon had UCLA scared because they almost choked this game. It wasn't UCLA escaping because they banked it in. UCLA escaped that Eugene win because they almost blew it, because they were leading the majority of the game. 3/4 of the game, UCLA was ahead, even though it was pretty close and back and forth. They still had not a firm grip, but a grip and slight control against the Ducks the first time. Doesn't mean Oregon can't come in and win, but it doesn't mean that without Bilodeau, UCLA is going to absolutely lose this game. No. They'll just have to lean on Mara. Dailey is going to be expected and needed to have a big game with his shot-making skills. And somebody in the UCLA backcourt is going to have to step up, guard Shellstad, you lean Kobe Johnson there, and also hit some big-time threes, because that's how the Bruins are able to beat Oregon. And the recipe for UCLA success, hit quality shots from three, don't turn it over, and as we've seen sometimes, just don't lose the game at the free throw line like they did against North Carolina, or how USC lost it late against UCLA. And then they could be looking at their 5th straight win, second win over a top 15, top 20 team in Oregon, and that just adds to the resume and builds it. Am I going to predict UCLA to win? I think this is too close to call. You got to see the injury report with Bilodeau, but they can absolutely win without Bilodeau against Oregon. Be extremely tough, and the Bruins have to have Shellstad be a volume shooter instead of an efficient one, because if he's efficient, this is a whole new Oregon team starving for a win and for revenge against UCLA after what happened the first time. Next, speaking about starving, the UCLA women are starving for an opportunity to play at their home gym, Pauley Pavilion. It's been a long time. How have the Road Warriors been facing off with the new adversity? We'll talk about that next on Locked On UCLA. UCLA, the women's team 20-0, doing the best impression of dominance that they've ever seen in the NCAA era women's basketball, number 1 in the country. They've already broken Big Ten records for most consecutive weeks at number 1, and they're closing in on, I think, the program's record for most wins in a row. They've got 20, looking for 21, and a continued dominance in the Big Ten. This is a UCLA team that is as well-traveled as the football team. More, I believe, than well-traveled than the men's team is at this point. Let's not forget, I always will remind you, but let's go over this again. Start of the season in France. Played in Hawaii. They went on their Maryland-Rutgers road trip. They played an extra game in New Jersey for the Coretta Scott King Classic, although they were already heading to New Jersey, so it's the same trip. And for good measure, a quick flight in the non-conference up to San Francisco, which to this is basically like a 15-minute drive for what the UCLA programs are going to deal with now that they're Big Ten conference members. All that with only one home game in the new year so far. They've played a second one at the Walter Pyramid in Long Beach, but they've played one game in Pauley Pavilion against Michigan, where the Bruins were a little sluggish, only beat the Wolverines 86-70, and then road wins against Indiana, dominated against Purdue, had the Northwestern game postponed because Northwestern did not come out west. Penn State came out, gave UCLA a run for their money at the Walter Pyramid on the campus of Long Beach State, but the Bruins won. And then on the East Coast trip, the Bruins handled business with ease over their last few games, and Lauren Betts putting up a career-best 33 points in as dominant a performance you'll see. Now they come home on February 2nd. They'll play against Minnesota. UCLA has not had a home game since January 1st. New Year's Day, more than a month has gone by since they played in Pauley Pavilion. A lot of that to do with the fires, one team canceling their trip, and then UCLA moving their game away when the UCLA campus was closed at that point. So all that adversity, but now there's a lot of home cooking. So despite not playing a game at home for a month, UCLA is not going to leave the West Coast basically for a month. They got home from Maryland probably around the night of the 26th, 27th. I'm not fully aware of their full travel schedule, but they played early in the morning, early-ish in the morning, Pacific time, 11 a.m. And if you're a college student, 11 a.m. can be early for some. They played an afternoon game on the East Coast. So that means 26th, 27th, they're getting settled here. This week, they have been settling in, getting back to school, getting back home for the first time in a week and a half. So this week, they have it off to rest and recover. They play Minnesota, Ohio State. They have a quick flight up to Oregon after that, and they come back during the Valentine's Day week and weekend to take on USC, which is the big game. So UCLA has 3 games in between then, and don't leave home until they go play Iowa on February 23rd, a Sunday, after they play Illinois a week after the USC game. So basically, they went a month away from home, and they've got a 3-week stint at home. Not exactly a month, a little more than 3 weeks, where they're just not going to leave, other than, yes, they go to Oregon, but they're going to stay on the West Coast. And I can tell you, those trips to Eugene can be tough, not just the crowd and the teams. They're not easy trips to Eugene. If you get a bad airline, if you get a bad weather day, it can be a troubling trip to Eugene, but that is much easier than going 5 or 6 hours back east or going all the way to Paris to start the season. Very, very different from what UCLA's had to do. And despite all this, UCLA has dominated. And I've kind of wondered, okay, they've got the AP poll, UCLA, a near unanimous number 1. They've got a holdout with people thinking maybe Notre Dame has a chance. They've got a holdout thinking, hey, actually, South Carolina deserves the number 1 over UCLA. I disagree very, very much when the number 1 team in the country beat the number 2 team in the country pretty easily, even if it wasn't a home court, by 15 to 20 points, where UCLA led that game the entire 40 minutes and played with an energy and absolute focus that they just haven't shown in other games. They've been dominant, don't get me wrong, because they're more talented and just much better in every phase up and down the lineup than most of the teams they face, but they were mostly dominant and focused against South Carolina. And we probably won't see that until they play USC on the road in the Galen Center. And the team that's got the best wins this year, I'd say Notre Dame on the women's side, they went there and beat USC with a very strong fourth quarter finish, keeping the Trojans away from in front of a sellout house from any big day, from a big win at all. Huge, 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 huge. So if UCLA wants to be ranked amongst the top 3 and continue to be a top 2, top 1 national champion potential, you got to go win at USC because Notre Dame's done it. South Carolina has started to figure it out, and they're dominating everybody in their path, including beating a then unbeaten LSU team at home by 10 or more points. And there's no better chance than settling in with the new quarter, settling in at home, and keeping on the West Coast, where you've got a bus trip at best and then a pretty easy flight to Eugene compared with what they've had to do so far. The Road Warriors, again, the long flight there and back to play the University of Hawaii, Paris, San Francisco, and a 3-game East Coast trip. All right, 3 games. Now, the schedule does favor the Bruins down the stretch because they go to Iowa and play Wisconsin, and then they play USC before the Big Ten tournament in Indianapolis. So they get their Indiana trip out of the way early against both Purdue and Indiana, as I think that should be, right? You should get Northwestern and Illinois, same trip, and then you should get Purdue and Indiana in the same trip, all right? That's what I think. UCLA got a little bit better with that scheduling. I'm not sure if they're actually going to host Northwestern or if they're just going to completely bang the game, cancel it. I haven't read anything that they will. Maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't. It was technically postponed. It's basically because if you're looking at the UCLA website, that game against Northwestern says it's postponed. I don't think it's going to change anybody's perspective of UCLA if they don't play that game, and I don't think Northwestern would be anywhere close to beating UCLA on UCLA's home floor. Don't think that's the case. So for this exercise, UCLA doesn't have a game to make up. They have one more Eastern bound trip in the regular season, an Indianapolis trip for the Big Ten tournament, and then that first round of the NCAA tournament. That's the thing with the women's side. You host those games. So UCLA is going to be hosting those games. They'll be on the western side of the Sweet 16 Elite 8 regionals at the neutral site games. And then, as we would all expect, they can go travel. So they'll have a lot lighter of a load, while Corey Close, probably like Mick Cronin, they're both going to have to battle the mental fatigue, different walls they're going to hit because UCLA is the team everybody wants to beat, and they're getting the national headlines they so deserve. A lot less travel left in this season, and I think that bodes well for UCLA, considering their biggest rival is not some team they're going to go pack out in the Big Ten. It's just down across town. And I can't wait for UCLA and USC on February 13th, but I wonder how later in the season, if the fatigue is going to wear in and wear on these players, regardless of the sport. Right now, we're talking basketball, both the men and the women, or with this long stretch at home, that will negate all the travel, the wear and tear, the emotional, the mental strains of everything with losing the home games, losing the games, the fires that's been wearing on players of both programs. But we still believe this team's going to do well. I still believe it, and I can't wait to talk about them some more leading up to the Minnesota game. And until then, stay here. We're going to talk more football recruiting, UCLA men's basketball. We're going to react to the UCLA-Oregon game coming up as well. So like, comment, subscribe, download. Thanks for your support. Get your hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked on UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.